Namaste. I am Maharaj Jain, and I would like to welcome you all to my YouTube channel called Brahma Gaje, a channel that is dedicated to philosophical discourse. Please do not forget to click on that like button and also that subscribe button. In this episode, we will continue expanding on this idea of idyllic state. In the first episode, we define what the idyllic state is, the state of innocence, almost like Garden of Eden or heaven or Satyug, the pleasant state. And then we raised this question that have we really fallen from that idyllic state? In this episode, we will focus on the philosophies of two great philosophers, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Thomas Hobbes. And as planned in the last episode, the episode 3, the concluding episode, we will attempt to answer this question that we raised in the first episode, that have we fallen from the idyllic state? So let's start. And let's start with the philosophy of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, particularly focusing on his essay called Discourse on the Origin and Basis of Inequality Among Men. Discourse on the Origin and Basis of Inequality Among Men. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote this essay in about 1754. He was participating in an essay contest and he won in that contest through this essay, and then really provided some pioneering ideas, philosophies, concepts for the domain of the Western philosophy. Rousseau was an aristocrat himself. So, Rousseau's idea in this essay focuses on this core concept that human beings having the need for property ownership led to their decay. In other words, humans fell, relating, again, connecting to our study here of the idyllic state, we can say that, based on this essay, that what Rousseau said, that humans fell from that idyllic state because of this core concept of having property ownership. If we did not have this idea, this need for property ownership, if we did not create this need of having property ownership, maybe we can say that we would still have been living in that idyllic state, the Garden of Eden-like state or Satyug-like state. But that is not the case, because now our societies are too complex and almost impossible to manage. And because of this idea of having property ownership, the inequality presented itself among us. And in order to try to make things equal, for centuries, we have fought wars and resulted into so much mess that we just cannot comprehend at this point. So all this is again because of this idea that we must own property. We must own the idea of property ownership, which led to, in Rousseau's mind, complex societies and structures. And therefore, we are in this miserable state that we are in, fallen from the grace, we can say. So in Rousseau's mind, what is that state of goodness? What is that state of nature? So in Rousseau's mind, that state of goodness or state of nature is really defined as something that is very simple, where there is pure equality and there is a lack of complex structure. Like we have right now, our societies are very, very complex. When we did not have this complexity, when we had simplicity, Rousseau argued that we had that state of goodness, state of nature. And we had equality, therefore we were living in that idyllic state. We can say that, from Rousseau's philosophy, that had we, again, I'm speaking metaphorically, connecting the dots, expanding this idea to the two examples that I had presented in the first episode, the first example of Garden of Eden and then the example of Satyug. So we can say that had we not eaten that fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, maybe we would have still been living in that idyllic state, because ownership, the idea of ownership, maybe wouldn't have never existed. When Adam and Eve ate that fruit, they realized, they were naked. Again, the ownership of body, or them owning this body or having this body and realizing that, and all around it, again, we can say that corruption would have never occurred. They were living in state of innocence, state of bliss, and they would have continued. So again, I'm just connecting the dot here, metaphorically speaking. But now going to the second example of Satyug, we can say that, if we didn't have this need to expand the regions and expand the kingdoms and expand the property ownerships and therefore then fight and have that corruption, in which the corrupted state being that we started taking over each other's properties and each other's ideas and belief systems and forcing things onto others, that corruption would have probably never occurred, and we would have still been living in that almost idyllic state, the Satyug. So again, in Rousseau's philosophy, in essence, all this decay, all this falling is because of our concept of property ownership leading to complex societies, etc. So we would have still been okay, again, had we not developed this concept of property ownership. That is Rousseau. And now let's look at the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, particularly his work Leviathan in about 1651. Again, a pioneering philosopher, inspirational towards development of many governments, many democracies, etc. Again, pioneering work that he provided for the Western philosophy, of the domain of Western philosophy. So Thomas Hobbes has a different idea. Yes, we have fallen from the idyllic state, again connecting the dots to our topic of discussion here, expanding his idea from this work Leviathan. Thomas says, and we can say that we fell from that state of nature, the state of goodness. And this is mainly because we lacked having a authority or sovereign government or sovereign king, etc. And because of that, the falling occurred. In other words, we cannot, the human beings cannot live in that primitive world, in that primitive state in which there is an egalitarian society where there is everybody's equal and there is no government, there is no form like possibly there might have been in the earlier stages of human civilization. That fell because they did not have a king or a government or a sovereign ruler or rule of law to govern. So in Hobbes' ideology, government, king, order is essential to maintain the idyllic state. And as soon as we do not have that, things fall apart, things fall into chaos, and human beings themselves cannot survive without that central authority some sort of a central figure. So, metaphorically speaking, again, we can say that, hey, God had trusted Adam and Eve, told them to not eat that fruit. But again, look, human beings cannot be trusted. That simple instruction that they were given was not followed. They ate the fruit and they fell. Connecting again to Satyug idea that the pure harmonious living that there might have been, as again connecting here to the concept of Thomas Hobbes, we can say that just humans could not live that way. The corruption was bound to happen because humans just could not live in a state where everybody is deemed equal. It's just not possible. And without a central authority to maintain order, things just fell. And maybe we can say that therefore the Satyug, or idea of Satyug, just could not be maintained. Look, we became so corrupted that in the next Yug, a king, Ram, had to be born to maintain order. And then, as we know, in each Yug, the Lord Vishnu takes an avatar to restore the order, restore the peace, restore the equality, restore the balance. Again, connecting the dots here, that we need a strong king, we need a strong God-like authority, a rule of law to have order in the society. Without that, human beings themselves, if left alone, just cannot be trusted. And therefore, the idyllic state just cannot be maintained. So Thomas Hobbes has this idea that, human beings are inherently selfish, self-interested beings and very competitive. And because of the reason, a authority has to happen. A government, a king must exist to balance it all out. Again, going to that Garden of Eden idea that, when God's authority was properly respected and maintained until, it didn't happen when the Adam and Eve didn't listen to that authority, ate that fruit, again, fell from the idyllic state. So human beings must have the divine authority or a rule of law to be, and they must be governed according to Thomas Hobbes. And again, I'm connecting the dots here to the two examples that I provided in the first episode, again expanding the thought here. But in Thomas Hobbes's mind, that people would naturally give up their own freedom to have this order. They would naturally give up their individual freedom and rights. We know in a democratic government, we give our freedom to, we create representatives, we elect representatives, and then we trust that those representatives will then create laws and order so that everybody and equality overall in the society could be maintained, right? So we gave up that freedom. We delegated that to our delegates, as we call them, in a democratic government. But in a king, or having a king in that monarchy type of a setup, we give that confidence, we give that authority in our king. We think that the king is almost like the God. He's sovereign, he's ultimate, and he will make the proper rules and therefore create equality among us and have an order. So again, Thomas Hobbes' idea was that people would willingly give up from the idea of religion, the idea of God. Again, we think that God is the supreme, therefore we give up our own authority and put all of our faith in that religious belief and that entity that we may have, and believe that God will provide equality among us, and whatever happens, we provide that. We submit ourselves to that. So again, in Thomas Hobbes' idea, people would willingly do this to have the idyllic state, the state of pleasant living, the state of equality, and people would willingly do that. So otherwise, people are inherently, as I mentioned, Thomas's idea is that we are inherently selfish, very competitive, and just cannot live without having this, and we can expand this idea and further say that, you look at any sovereign nation. The nation has laws, nation has orders, and people have surrendered, given their freedom to the central authority, central government, a king or what have you, to rule them with the hope that there would be equality, there would be order maintained in the society and not complete chaos. So that is Thomas Hobbes' central idea in his work again, the Leviathan. So two philosophers, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose principal idea is that yes, we have fallen from that idyllic state. And why? Because we had this urge of having ownership, property ownership, and which eventually led to that decay. And thus we are in this state. If we didn't have the property ownership idea, maybe we would have been okay, and then we would have been living in this idyllic state. Again, this is expanding that idea of that philosopher. In Thomas Hobbes' idea that human beings lacking a proper social structure, a proper sovereign entity, king, government, etc., lacking that would fall into chaos, and we fell from that because, primitively speaking, maybe we had that egalitarian living, but it was small and it just could not be maintained because human beings inherently are selfish and self-centered and very competitive, and therefore without having a proper sovereign government entity body, they would just fall apart, and therefore the idyllic state could not be maintained. So in order to have that, in Thomas's idea, we must have a central authority, a figure, a sovereign king, etc. And that is essential. Now, Thomas Hobbes was himself not a very religious guy, but he tolerated. He felt that having religion actually helps maintain order, and we just kind of discussed that too. That the people who believe in religion provide or put their faith into that religion, into an entity within that religion, God or Messiah or saint, what have you, and surrender to that and hope that they would be treated equally, that there would be balance in the order and things would be fair for them. So that concept of religion was welcomed by Thomas Hobbes. He himself was not necessarily religious either. So again, we looked at the philosophies of these two great philosophers in this episode. And in the next episode, we will attempt to answer this question that we raised in the first episode, that have we fallen from the idyllic state? That is all I have for you. Namaste.